Introduction: The Architect's Eye and the Blank Canvas. The greatest condemnation of the ordinary man is his blind faith in the solidity of the world. Since you have had the use of reason, you have been trained to believe that three-dimensional reality is an immovable block of stone, a hard, cold, and prefabricated stage into which you were cast at birth. The inertial slave walks through this stage, assuming the role of a passive victim. He believes that economic crises, scarcity, rejection, and pain are granite mountains that simply happen to him and against which he can only crash and bleed. This is the most pathetic optical hallucination in human history. Quantum physics, stripped of academic blackboards, proved a century ago a truth that shakes the foundations of that prison. Dense matter does not exist with a fixed form in the dark. The universe, in its fundamental state, is not an unalterable block of stone. It is an infinite ocean of mist, an abyss of probabilities in suspense. It is a primordial soup where absolute success and miserable failure coexist at the same time, waiting for a thermal order to collapse and solidify. What is the shock force that compels that mist to become rock, gold, or steel? The observer's gaze. Human perception is not a passive glass window through which you merely watch life pass. Perception is the tempered steel chisel that carves matter. It is the smelting furnace that takes raw energy and grants it physical weight. You do not see the world as it is. You force the world to be exactly what you are seeing. Imagine an immense and violent ocean covered by a mist so thick that not even starlight can pierce it. In that absolute darkness, the sea is an undefined chaos. There is no horizon, no reefs, no vessels, but high atop a cliff of black rock, a lone lighthouse stands. At the exact instant, the lighthouse ignites its immense lamp and projects a concentrated beam of light onto the mist. Reality materializes. Where the light cuts through the abyss, the furious waves become visible, the foam glistens, and the rocks emerge with lethal clarity. If the lighthouse turns and points toward another coordinate, that piece of ocean disintegrates back into the void of the mist, and a new physical reality emerges under the newly illuminated line. Your attention, your unshakable expectation, and your way of interpreting events are the beam of light from that lighthouse on the coast. You are the architect facing a blank canvas of cosmic dimensions. In this book, we are going to break the soot-stained lens with which you were taught to look at your own life. You are going to stop being the frightened spectator in the dark to become the fire of the lighthouse. You will learn the relentless optics of the titans. You will discover that the outside world is simply mute clay, waiting on its knees for your eyes to decide whether they are going to carve a tomb or an absolute empire. Chapter 1: The Illusion of Dense Matter and the Atomic Abyss. Since the first day you opened your eyes in this world, and your infant hands touched the ground, you have been the victim of the most elaborate and convincing fraud in the entire universe, the deception of your own senses. You have been trained to blindly trust what your fingers feel and what your retinas capture. If you hit a solid oak table with your knuckles, you feel a sharp impact. You hear the dull sound of wood against skin, and your intellect concludes that the table is hard, dense, and impenetrable. Based on this basic sensory experience, you build the entire philosophy of your existence and raise the walls of your own prison. The catastrophe occurs when you extrapolate this illusion of solidity to everything abstract that surrounds you. You begin to believe that the outside world is a stone fortress. You conclude that the lack of money in your bank account is an impassable steel wall. You assume that the opinion of critics and the rejection of peers are heavy boulders crushing your chest. You convince yourself that economic crises or fierce competition are reinforced concrete barriers against which you can only crash and bleed. The inertial slave, operating in the low frequency of fear, lives eternally kneeling before the altar of dense matter. He stands before adversity, declares it indestructible, and sits to weep in its shadow, justifying mediocrity with the pathetic excuse that the world is a hard place. This work is the absolute demolition of that tomb of ignorance. We are here to prove that the wall is a mirage. We will take the lens of deep knowledge of atomic structure and discover the liberating truth hidden behind the curtain of reality. Solid matter, as you conceive it, does not exist. That which terrifies you is, in its vast majority, empty space. 3D problems are not granite rocks. They are vibrant clouds of energy that respond with mathematical obedience to the temperature of your own gaze. We must initiate the descent into the atomic abyss. Everything you see and touch, skyscraper steel, vaulted gold, the flesh of enemies, is composed of atoms. During the dark age of science, humans believed atoms were tiny solid spheres stacked like bricks. That was the perfect justification for a cruel, unalterable world. But when human curiosity looked inside matter, it discovered a geometric aberration that shattered the sanity of the materialistic world. They discovered that the atom is practically empty. It is a ghost. Visualize this void with the coldness of an astronomer. If you took a single atom from a wooden table and enlarged it to the size of a vast cathedral, the nucleus, where 99.9% of its mass resides, would be the size of a small fly floating in the geometric center. And the electrons? They would be microscopic particles buzzing at the speed of light along the outermost edges of the vaulted ceiling. The question that must freeze your blood is, what lies between that small fly and the electrons on the walls? Absolutely nothing. Pure vacuum. Laws of nature dictate that 99.9999999% of any physical object you touch is empty space. If you could squeeze all the empty space out of the atoms of the 8 billion humans on Earth, the entire human race would fit into the volume of a sugar cube. That cube would weigh millions of tons, possessing monstrous gravity, but it would occupy a tiny space in the palm of your hand. That is the empirical truth. The world is an immense ghost, an extremely diluted mist sustained by invisible forces. If the world is a ghost made of void, your logic will scream, "Why does it hurt when I hit the table? Why can't I pass my hand through the wall like mist?" The answer does not lie in solidity. The answer is magnetic repulsion. Both your hand and the stone wall are formed by atoms surrounded by electron clouds with a negative charge. In magnetism, equal charges repel each other with violence. Before they actually touch, both clouds reject each other with brutal force. Your nerves detect that magnetic repulsion, and your brain translates it as hardness. Understand this with the coldness of steel. You have never truly touched anything. Your atoms have never made direct physical contact with the chair, lips, or money. You have always been floating at a microscopic distance, sustained and rejected by invisible forces. You are a spectre walking through a world of spectres, convinced you are surrounded by stone. The architect of the now understands the depth of this void. When the architect looks at a devastating financial problem or a failure that would leave others on their knees, he does not see a concrete wall. He laughs at the illusion of solidity. He knows that impossibility is not a physical truth, but a repulsion of forces. If difficulty is not solid rock, then brute force and suffering are useless. If you alter your frequency and adjust the optics with which you observe the threat, you can slide majestically through the atomic void of the problem, leaving enemies wondering how you bypassed it. To master this optical alteration, we use a perfect mechanical analogy: the giant steel extraction fan. Imagine you descend into the basement of an abandoned factory. You face an immense circular ventilation duct, 3 meters in diameter, with 5 sharp steel blades. The factory is dead. You approach the motionless fan. You notice the blades are relatively thin. It is evident that 90% of the space inside that circle is simply empty air. You could pass your entire arm between the blades without a scratch. The obstacle is transparent, passive, and harmless. But suddenly, the generator hums to life. The motor accelerates to thousands of revolutions per minute. What do your eyes see now? The blades cut the air so fast your retina cannot process individual pieces of metal. Optical illusion takes over. What was a circle of breathable air a minute ago is now perceived as a dark, grey, solid, and impenetrable steel disc. If you were a naive observer, you would swear the duct is blocked by a wall of solid metal. If you dared to push your hand against that deceptive disc, the rotating blades would strike your flesh with the destructive force of an iron sledgehammer, fracturing your bones. You would retreat, convinced you hit an unbreakable wall. But the master engineer knows the truth. He knows the fan's structure hasn't changed. 90% of that circle is still pure air and vacuum. The only difference is one factor: the speed and frequency of rotation. Acceleration creates the illusion of density. This metaphor is the key to your empire. Your visceral fear, your suffocating anxiety, and your perception of being a victim are the electricity that turns the motor of your problems. When the slave faces a financial betrayal, his primitive brain enters absolute panic. Terror floods his blood like hot poison. By injecting this hysterical attention into his misfortune, the slave is turning the fan motor to maximum power. He becomes obsessed with debt, discussions of misery, and cold sweats. All this energy accelerates the blades. The financial betrayal, which was originally just a logistical setback with plenty of empty space for creative solutions, starts spinning at thousands of RPMs. To the slave's panicked eyes, the problem fuses into an impenetrable titanium disc. The debt looks mortal. When the slave tries to find a way out, he crashes against the hurricane speed of his own fear. He ends up emotionally wounded and bitter, declaring, "It's impossible to escape this ruin. The barrier is too strong." The architect of the now faces life differently. When a crisis darkens the horizon, the architect recognizes the steel fan trap. He knows that if he allows fear to accelerate his pulse, he feeds the motor and the obstacle solidifies. Therefore, he applies his first tactic, the thermal cooling of his own perception. Before imminent ruin, the architect stops cold. He stops looking at the spinning blades of disaster. He drops his shoulders and forces his heart to slow down, imposing the heavy, bored stillness of lead. By refusing to inject hysteria, he cuts the motor's power cord. With crossed arms and a glacial gaze, the architect simply waits. He becomes an inert observer. As he watches, the physics of the universe does its work. Without the energy of his fear to sustain the movement, the problem begins to lose speed. Inertia decays. The blades of the crisis spin slower and slower. The terrifying hum becomes a whisper. Suddenly, the optical illusion of the solid gray disk vanishes. The empty space between the gears of tragedy becomes visible again. The mist settles. In that stillness, the architect sees with crystalline clarity the enormous free space where he can pass without being cut. He discovers the legal loophole. He identifies the hidden client. He finds the exact route of least resistance. With a firm and majestic step, he walks through the powered-down fan, leaving the problem behind like dust in the wind. The threatening density of your problems is directly proportional to the hysteria of your perception. Keep the heart anchored, and walls disappear. This same optical blindness paralyzes men when they challenge the great structures of the world. The novice wanting to build an empire looks at massive corporations and suffers a lethal paralysis. He sees them as granite mountains, as impregnable fortresses. He feels like a grain of sand against an unreachable wall. Convinced of the solidity of his rivals, he abandons the battlefield. The architect knows that a foreign empire is not a stone castle. It is an immense cloud of dust held together by the inertia of past successes. Massive structures suffer from rigidity. Their greatness makes them slow and full of cracks where heat escapes. The architect activates his perception of the void. He sees the chasms of inert space between the atoms of the competition. He sees the unmet needs. Instead of a stupid frontal assault against stone, the architect slides through the atomic void of the market. He attacks from angles the giant is too rigid to defend. He absorbs value in unattended corners and infiltrates the core before the giant can even turn its gears. The giant collapses under its own weight, destroyed by someone who understood its walls were an atomic hologram. If the universe is malleable and empty, why is misery the norm? Because perception is not a clean lens. The human mind is like a telescope. Installed next to a chimney burning cold day and night, your humiliations and poverty have acted as a rain of soot and black ash depositing on your lens. When you look at reality, you don't see the cosmos. You see dark spots, blurry shadows, and a suffocating abyss. You blame the universe. You shout that the world is a dark place. You are blind to your own negligence. The universe is terrifyingly beautiful. It is the glass of your beliefs that is stained with dross. The architect's work is not to change the universe. He doesn't try to polish the stars. He knows his only physical responsibility is the maintenance of his own optics. Using the rough cloth of discipline and the absolute rigor of isolating himself from noise, the architect polishes the lens of his perception until it is immaculate. He rips away the soot of victimization. He cleans the ash of scarcity. He dissolves the stains of cowardly hope. When the glass is perfect and cold, the architect sees the field of infinite, vibrant energy waiting for the sculptor to command the atoms to obey. Chapter 2. The Quantum Chisel, the Observer Effect. This passive spectator stance is a scientific aberration. It is an insult to the fundamental mechanics of the cosmos and a voluntary resignation from the throne of your own existence. The 200 Hertz inertial slave walks the street believing the world he sees was already there before he arrived. He believes missing money is a geological fact. We are going to take that philosophy of weakness and grind it in the mill of quantum physics. In the first decades of the 20th century, physicists discovered a phenomenon that destroyed the illusion of the independent universe forever. They executed the double-slit experiment and faced the terrifying power of the observer effect. They discovered that the primordial energy that composes everything, light, electrons, the fundamental blocks of matter, does not travel through space like small solid stones. It travels as an expansive wave, like ripples in a dark pond. While that energy travels as a wave, it has no fixed location. It is an abyss of suspended possibilities. But here lies the terrifying miracle that grants you the crown of the empire. At the exact millisecond, a scientist decides to observe that invisible wave. The entire wave suffers a cataclysmic collapse. The immensity of possibilities vanishes instantly, and the energy freezes, adopting a solid, defined particle form in space. Empirical physics prove the universe has no real physical form until you look at it. Paying attention is not a passive process. Human attention is a high-density thermodynamic laser. Your gaze is an active mechanical force that clashes against the mist of quantum possibilities and forces atoms to crystallize into your expectation. You are not the audience in the theater of your life. You are the carbon arc light projector that is melting the film onto the blank screen of matter. For this truth to descend into the flesh and bone of your daily routine, we must leave the laboratory and enter the raw workshop of a master artist. We will use the most monumental analogy of classical sculpture, the immense block of raw marble. Imagine you enter a cold, dusty industrial warehouse. In the center of the room, lit by a beam of sunlight, rests a block of white marble recently extracted from the quarry. It weighs 20 tons. It is rough, irregular, and dense. Bring an ordinary man, an inertial slave, into that room. Ask him to look at the stone. What does the slave see? He sees an immense obstacle. He sees a useless, heavy, cold, and boring rock. He complains about the dust and declares that the block has no 3D value. His perception stops at the rough surface. For him, it is a tomb of useless effort. Now expel the slave and let the master sculptor enter, the architect of the now. The architect stands before the same 20-ton mass. His eyes do not stop at the surface. His optics are calibrated to pierce the crust of matter. He does not see an amorphous stone. He sees an immensity of quantum possibilities trapped in the mineral. With the icy arrogance of genius, the architect decides exactly which reality he is going to collapse. Within that irregular stone, his laser perception visualizes the colossal figure of an emperor, a majestic David, or a rearing warhorse. To the architect, the statue already exists. It is already complete and breathing within the block. The only tactical problem is that the statue of his empire has too much useless rock stuck around it. What is the tool he uses to free the masterpiece? The chisel. The chisel is nothing more than an extension of the sculptor's concentrated perception. It is a carbon steel tip that channels all the thermal force of his vision. Every time the architect strikes the chisel, he is not destroying stone out of whim. he is executing an act of selective blindness. He is shattering everything that does not belong to his original vision. He removes the fragments of mediocrity. The architect does not create the statue by striking. He reveals it by removing the stone mist. Your daily perception, the way you choose to look at your bank account, your corporate problems, and your own weaknesses, is your quantum chisel. Every second you are awake, you are standing before the immense block of raw marble of the unified field. The universe hands you 20 tons of neutral energy every morning. The thermodynamic tragedy of civilization is that the vast majority of humans use this chisel to sculpt their own misery with a terrifying degree of detail. When the slave wakes up and fixes his attention on the fear of poverty, he is placing the observer's chisel on the marble and striking a blow to carve out scarcity. When he walks to work repeating that no one values his effort, he is delivering thousands of ballistic and frenetic blows, chiseling the chains that will keep him prisoner. Attention is an undeniable force of impact. If you scan the world for signs of betrayal and crisis, you force the quantum wave to collapse into a stone monster. The solitary king exercises absolute optical tyranny over the tip of his chisel. The architect understands that his concentrated attention is the most expensive currency in the cosmos. Therefore, he flatly refuses to strike the stone if it is not to carve the empire. When a crisis appears, the architect stops before the marble. He does not allow his perception to spiral into panic. The slave would carve the word ruin. The architect isolates his gaze, cools the temperature of his ribcage, focuses the incandescent light of his attention, and observes the same crisis until he discovers the gold fragment hidden in the fracture. With a cold, dull blow, the architect uses his perception to chisel the crisis and carve the phrase strategic voiding. He transmutes the firing of a partner into a necessary purge of corporate dross. He does not allow the wave to collapse into tragedy. He forces the atoms to reorganize until the crisis becomes a base for wealth. The observer effect dictates that the world has no inherent qualities. The world inherits the quality of the lens that observes it. If you look at a team as a group of incompetents, your aggressive perception will emit an electromagnetic frequency that alters the environment. Your body language will emit mistrust. By sympathetic resonance, you will force that group to collapse into the most clumsy and demotivated version of themselves. You will have sculpted them as useless, but if you enter a boardroom with the optics of unshakable authority and view them as tools for victory, the wave collapses into the opposite geometry. People feel the gravitational weight of your expectation. Their nervous systems react to the density of your gaze. They are forced to align with the power structure you just projected. They begin to operate with levels of excellence they didn't know they possessed, because you chiseled them using only the pressure of your gaze. You must understand the genocidal responsibility that comes with carrying this chisel. There are no rest moments in the reality factory. The quantum universe takes no vacations. There is not a single instant in your biological life in which you are not sculpting matter. When you are distracted, you haven't dropped the chisel. You have simply handed the tool to a blind monkey to strike the marble of your destiny chaotically, ruining the masterpiece while you look away. Tactical blindness, therefore, becomes the architect's most sacred military discipline. The art of ignoring the irrelevant is the act of withdrawing the chisel from areas that shouldn't exist. If a tiny detractor whispers behind your back and you turn, pay attention, and get angry, you have just granted them physical mass. You have collapsed the wave of their envy and turned it into a real rock in your path. You have sculpted them as a worthy enemy. The solitary king never wastes a hammer blow on an insect. When the murmur of mediocrity tries to infiltrate his resonance chamber, the architect applies an absolute voluntary blindness. He withdraws the laser beam of his attention, and physics does its work. That which is ignored by the supreme observer fails to solidify in the 3D matrix. Envy remains a harmless cloud of vapor. By not looking at it, you have annihilated it from operative existence. The power to collapse matter demands that you forever abandon the language of reaction. The inertial slave describes the world. He walks through life saying, "The weather is bad, the economy is slow." He believes his mouth is a news station reporting facts. The architect of the now understands that his mouth is the forge and his eyes are the mold. The architect does not describe the reality in front of him. The architect dictates the sentence to matter. When he looks at his bank account and sees an alarming void, he refuses to describe scarcity. He knows describing it solidifies it. Instead of reacting to the raw rock, he adjusts the lens of his inner eye. He contemplates the immensity of the empty vault as a logistical space being intentionally cleared by the universe to make room for incoming gold. He holds that vision, heavy and devoid of hysterical emotion, and keeps the chisel firm at that coordinate. By holding his gaze on invisible abundance and denying authority to visible scarcity, the architect generates colossal structural tension in the unified field. The universe cannot bear the dissonance between the observer's heavy order and the environment's soft matter. Probability waves clash and events accelerate. The atoms of the market are violently dragged to collapse in the form of new contracts and massive capital flows. All this happens because one man refused to accept the first amorphous shape the marble offered and demanded with his gaze that the block yield until it handed him the empire. Assume the majesty of this power. It is the only empirical truth that separates beasts of burden from galaxy forgers. Rise from the seats of this ruined theater. Recognize that the horror movie playing on the screen of your life was not recorded by an external director. You have held the camera in the dark, focusing your lens on the dead ends. You have chiseled your prison by paying attention to the bars. From this second of atomic clarity, the camera is yours. The hammer is in your hands. Quantum optics obey you. Walk toward the immense, terrifying white block of the 3D universe. Observe the infinite mist of what could be and do not feel a hint of vertigo. Refine your lens until not a single stain of useless hope or parasitic doubt remains. Visualize the statue of your total domination with the brutality of mathematical certainty, and then, with the coldness of one who sculpts the destiny of time itself, deal the first blow upon the marble. The matter will surrender to the king. Chapter 3. The Cataracts of the Ego, Cleaning the Dirty Lens. There is a silent, degenerative disease that attacks the machinery of human perception, an affliction that is not diagnosed in hospitals because the vast majority of the species was born suffering from it and considers it the natural state of existence. In biological medicine, when the lens of the human eye becomes opaque due to the accumulation of degraded proteins that block the passage of photons, we say that the patient suffers from cataracts. The world becomes blurry, colors lose their temperature, and light scatters into a halo of confused fog. This continues until the individual is plunged into a gray and perpetual blindness. The 200 Hz inertial slave suffers from an identical condition, but 1,000 times more destructive, operating at the level of the physics of his own consciousness. The cataracts of the ego. Throughout your life, from the instant you were thrown into the friction of this three-dimensional world, your perceptive apparatus has been under constant bombardment. The betrayals of those who claimed to be loyal, the financial failures that left your chest hollow, public humiliations, the glacial rejections of the market. And, above all, the terrified words of parents, teachers, and authority figures who injected you with their own cowardice. All this mud has fallen incessantly upon you. The ordinary human, lacking the thermal shields of a monarch, allows all this emotional dross to deposit directly onto the optical lens of his deep mind. Fear of failure, resentment, and victimhood are not abstract ideas. In the thermodynamics of your psyche, they act as physical layers of soot, ash, and industrial dust that adhere to the surface of your observing crystal. Year after year, decade after decade, the crust of dirt becomes thicker, darker, and more impenetrable. The ego, that primitive survival mechanism designed to defend you from friction, becomes the architect of your own blindness. The ego adores the soot. It clings to the stains on the lens because the dirt justifies its existence. If the lens is dirty and the world looks like a threatening, unjust, and dark place, the ego has the perfect excuse not to go out to battle, not to risk capital, and not to face the terror of immensity. The slave looks through his psychological cataracts, observes a market full of monsters, crises, and scarcity, and curls up in the corner of his own mediocrity, declaring with bitterness, The world is a cruel place. The economy is designed to crush me. Nobody values my talent. This is the most pathetic optical farce in the history of humanity. The slave is convinced that his diagnosis of the universe is empirical and real. He believes he is describing the topography of the external matrix with scientific precision. He ignores, with a stupidity that freezes the blood, that the cosmos is a neutral canvas, an ocean of atoms overflowing with infinite potential energy, and that the suffocating darkness he perceives does not come from a lack of light in the world, but from the repulsive layer of dirt that coats the glass of his own telescope. To understand the magnitude of this thermal and visual tragedy, visualize an amateur astronomer who has acquired the most powerful and exquisite refracting telescope ever built. It is a sublime instrument of optical engineering designed to capture light from galaxies located at the edges of the known universe. Full of arrogance, the astronomer installs his majestic instrument in his backyard. But he commits a brutal geographical miscalculation. He has installed the telescope exactly 10 meters from the chimney of a gigantic steel foundry that operates day and night. For weeks, the foundry expels tons of black smoke and toxic ash. Heavy carbon particles and a fine incessant rain of slag falls upon the main lens of the telescope, adhering to the glass until it forms an opaque and greasy crust. One night, the astronomer decides to peer through the eyepiece to contemplate the immensity. He aligns the telescope barrel toward a nebula burning at millions of degrees. There, gigantic stars are born wrapped in clouds of gold and luminous radiation. But the light of that cosmic wonder, after traveling unobstructed for millennia through the pristine vacuum of space, crashes head-on against the soot-covered glass of his lens. The photons cannot penetrate the carbon crust. The light scatters, deforms, and is absorbed by the dirt. What does the astronomer see at the end of the tube? He does not see the majesty of creation. He sees a dark, deformed, grayish, and suffocating smudge. He sees a shadow lacking temperature and life. Indignant, the astronomer pulls his face away from the eyepiece. He takes a notebook and writes with absolute conviction, "The universe is dead. Galaxies do not exist. The sky is an abyss of rubble, darkness, and ugliness. Light is a lie invented by optimists." The astronomer becomes a prophet of pessimism. He walks the streets trying to convince others that the sky is not worth it. His tragedy is not that the universe is dark. The universe continues to burn up there, majestic and unalterable, with a thermodynamic violence that escapes human understanding. The catastrophe lies in the fact that this man refuses to accept that the problem is inches from his own eye. He refuses to take a damp cloth, rub the glass, and apply the friction necessary to clean the lens. He prefers to blame the immensity of the cosmos rather than assume the humiliating responsibility of washing his own dirt. This is the exact X-ray of your three-dimensional existence until this very second. When an asymmetric opportunity, a massive contract, or an elite ally crosses your horizon, the universe is sending you the pure light of a star. It is a beam of energy charged with gold and thermal expansion. But when that beam of light impacts against your lens, which is encrusted with the soot of your past failures, and the resentment toward those who hurt you, the physical phenomenon of distorted refraction occurs. Snell's law in optics dictates that when light passes from a pure medium into a dense and corrupted one, the ray bends, alters its speed, and changes its geometric trajectory. The millionaire opportunity enters through your retina, passes through the layer of your unresolved traumas, and your brain processes it as a threat. Where there is gold, your dirty mind sees a scam. Where there is a loyal partner, your lens stained by past betrayal sees an imposter coming to stab you. Where there is a precipice inviting you to spread your wings and fly towards sovereignty, your perception filled with cataracts only sees an open grave waiting to devour you. You react with hostility, flee the battlefield, and reject the gold, swearing on your life that you have just saved yourself from a predator. And the external matrix, which is an obedient mirror, shrugs at your blindness, withdraws the opportunity, and leaves you alone in your room, caressing the security of your misery while you blame the economy for your lack of results. You are not a victim of the economy. You are a victim of the disgusting lack of hygiene. You are a victim of your own perceptive apparatus. The architect of the now, the monarch who has sworn to conquer the gravity of the material world, declares absolute war against the cataracts of the ego. The architect understands that possessing an immaculate lens is not a philosophical luxury. It is a military-grade necessity for tactical survival and the domination of the empire. He knows that a single degree of deviation in optics, caused by a speck of resentment or a cloud of cowardly hope, can cause a laser beam meant to cut steel to deflect and end up setting his own ship on fire. Therefore, the most harrowing, cold and constant work of the solitary king is the process of smelting and polishing his own observing crystal. In the industry of precision engineering, to create the perfect optical glass used in space telescopes or military satellites, the material is not cleaned with warm water. Silica sand must be thrown into an infernal crucible and subjected to temperatures exceeding 1,700 degrees Celsius. In that thermodynamic hell, air bubbles expand until they burst, and chemical impurities, iron, carbon, vulgar minerals, are literally calcined, forced to rise to the surface as boiling slag. This is done to be removed with titanium tools. Once the glass cools, that is not enough. It must be subjected to months of incessant mechanical polishing, where diamond abrasives rub the surface millions of times, stripping away microscopic layers of glass until the curvature of the lens reaches a mathematical perfection. It must reach zero defects, capable of letting 100% of light pass without altering a single photon. That infernal crucible is the anechoic chamber of your solitude. The diamond abrasive is the ruthless and sociopathic self-criticism you must exercise over your own excuses. To clean the lens of your perception, you have to subject yourself to the most painful thermal friction a human being can experience, the total and absolute abandonment of the victim narrative. The ego loathes this process. Your inertial mind will scream in agony when you begin to rub the lens. Because cleaning the glass means accepting that your former partner did not destroy your company. It was you who did not audit the contracts out of weakness. Cleaning the glass means recognizing that the crisis did not take your money. It was you who did not build a steel hull thick enough to withstand the storm. Cleaning the glass means looking your aging parents in the eye and understanding that their words of discouragement were not a cosmic curse condemning you to failure, but simply the harmless chatter of two frightened mammals projecting their own dirty lens onto you, which you decided to accept as a geological truth. When you assume 100% thermal responsibility for everything that happens within the perimeter of your universe, you apply the diamond abrasive to the cataracts of your ego. At first it hurts, because the ego feels its skin is being ripped off. You feel the sting of wounded pride. But as you continue polishing, as you refuse to blame the wind for the falling of your sails and assume the blame for not knowing how to tie the knots, the carbon crust begins to give way. The opacity cracks. The stains of resentment disintegrate under the friction of your objective coldness. Suddenly, a ray of pure light manages to pierce the lens. Then another. The vision begins to clear, and the vertigo you feel is not from weakness, but from the terrifying sharpness of the immensity revealed before you. When the lens is finally immaculate, when the architect's perception reaches absolute purity, and the crystal harbors not a single spot of fear, hope, or victimhood, the reversal of cosmic power occurs. Your perceptive apparatus ceases to be a simple passive telescope receiving light from the outside and transmutes into the condensing lens of a high-pressure astronomical lighthouse. Visualize a lighthouse of black rock erected on the edge of a cliff, surrounded by an ocean plunged into a storm of darkness and thick fog. If the glass of the lighthouse is stained with mud and saltpeter, the immense voltaic arc lamp inside will emit a diffuse, weak, and sickly light. The light will crash against the dirt on the glass, scatter uselessly, and barely manage to illuminate a couple of meters of fog, creating elongated shadows that look like monsters writhing in the mist. The ships navigating nearby, seeing those deformed shadows, will panic and crash against the sharp rocks. The dirty lighthouse is not only useless, it is a generator of chaos and destruction. But the architect has polished his crystal. The architect has endured the hell of the smelting and has removed every last molecule of soot from his observing lens. Now, when the solitary king turns on the reactor of his intention. When he injects the thermodynamic energy of quantum lead and directs it toward the outer matrix, the light finds no resistance in the crystal. The beam of energy passes through the perfect lens, focuses, and shoots into the abyss of the three-dimensional fog as an industrial laser beam of incalculable density. This laser of clean perception does not generate monstrous shadows or illusions of terror. The light cuts through the fog like an incandescent blade through cold wax. Wherever the beam of your crystalline attention rests, the mist of quantum possibilities instantly collapses into sharp, exact, and obedient forms. If you point the lighthouse toward the chaos of a market in crisis, your pure perception burns through surface confusion and reveals the hidden architecture of opportunity. You see the underground capital flows, you see the structural flaws of the competition, and you see the path paved in gold. You see what no one else can see because everyone else is blinded by their own cataracts. With this purified optics, interaction with other human beings, with the 200 Hz horde, radically changes its thermodynamic nature. When the dirty lensed slave receives an insult, his lens reacts and magnifies the offense. He feels hurt and strikes back, wasting his valuable fuel on a mud war. The architect of the now, having a transparent crystal, possesses emotional X-ray vision. When a toxic individual approaches to attack him, the architect does not look at the surface of the attack. His light penetrates the skin, flesh, and bones. He pierces the mask of hostility and observes with a surgeon's coldness the pathetic small amygdala shrunken by terror inside the aggressor's skull. The architect sees the pipes of his biology leaking cortisol, sees the thermodynamic void of his lack of results, and understands that the insult is not a lethal attack. It is simply the inertial moan of a wounded beast drowning in its own fear. By perceiving the atomic truth behind the other's behavior, the offense loses all its gravity. The insult bounces off the architect's immaculate glass without leaving a mark. The Titan's empathy is not a warm and weak hug. The Titan's empathy is a cold, real-time autopsy of the mechanical inferiority of his enemies. And because the architect sees through the threat, he discovers that the threat is 99% empty space, an edgeless hologram. There is no need to get angry with a hologram. One only needs to walk through it. Assuming the tyranny of the clean lens has a price, a cosmic toll that very few are willing to pay, the condemnation of absolute clarity and structural isolation. When you clear the cataracts of your ego, you forever lose the right to comforting ignorance. You can no longer sit at the table with the herd. You can no longer complain about the government, the weather, or supposed bad luck. You can no longer find warmth in the fire of the shared excuse, because you have discovered that the excuse is simply an acoustic lie that slaves tell themselves so as not to feel the cold of their own incompetence. The world sheds its romantic mysteries and reveals itself as a gigantic, blind, mathematical, and brutally fair clockwork mechanism that responds non-negotiably to the atmospheric pressure of the one observing it. This geometric solitude is not a punishment. It is the empty throne waiting for a monarch. In this state of perceptive purity, the structural tension of quantum lead becomes your organic resting state. You walk the streets of the three-dimensional matrix not as a beggar looking for clues in the trash, but as the owner of the foundry inspecting his domains. You know that if a project fails, it was because your observing lens went out of focus for a millisecond. You adjust the angle, cool the engine, and fire the beam again. You know that if money does not flow, it is because you were observing lack, forcing atoms to crystallize into debts. You clean the glass, fix your gaze on imminent abundance, ignore the inertial delay of matter, and watch as the fabric of space-time groans, twists, and collapses to deposit wealth at your exact coordinates. Everything in the physical universe is a slave to the light that defines it. Take the abrasive cloth. Abandon the warm and rotten comfort of your victimhood. Sink your hands into the acid of truth and rub the lens of your mind until the glass shrieks in pain. Rub until you remove the last memory of weakness, the last justification for laziness, and the last trace of fear of immensity. When the glass of your telescope becomes invisible by its own purity, you will realize that the darkness of the world was never real. The canvas was blank all this time, silently waiting for the architect to turn on the lighthouse, rest his steel gaze upon the abyss, and emit the unbreakable order. Emit the order that the empire be sculpted. Clean the glass. Matter awaits your command. Chapter 4. The Alchemy of Meaning, Forging the Weight of Events. There is a purulent deception that civilization has carefully cultivated to justify the fragility of its individuals. It is the pathetic belief that events occurring in the physical world possess an inherent emotional temperature. The ordinary human walks the earth convinced that bankruptcy is, by universal definition, a tragedy. He is certain that rejection from an authority figure is, intrinsically, a humiliation. He assumes that the betrayal of a business partner contains within its atoms the very essence of cruelty. By granting external events the power to dictate their meaning, the slave hands over the keys of his own kingdom to the tyranny of chance. He becomes a vassal of matter, a drifting ship that moans and laments every time a wave strikes the wood of its hull. This worldview is a blasphemy against the laws of physics and a shameful renunciation of the crown of consciousness. In the implacable coldness of the 3D universe, no event has a meaning of its own. A hurricane, a firing, a global economic crisis, an insult, or a massive financial loss are, at an atomic level, sterile events. They are pure and raw energy transfer. They are molecules crashing into other molecules, air currents shifting due to pressure differences, and numbers moving from one column to another in a ledger. There is no evil in loss. There is no goodness in gain. The cosmos is a canvas of terrifying neutrality, a deaf and blind ocean that simply churns. Meaning, pain, tragedy, or glory do not come from the event itself. They are a chemical byproduct manufactured exclusively in the gut of the one who observes it. Human perception is the only factory of meaning in the known universe. You are the alchemist. The problem, the great tragedy of your lineage, is that you have been operating your alchemical laboratory on autopilot, allowing fear, inertia, and the trembling voice of the crowd to decide what potion will be distilled from every blow you receive. To tear the identity of the victim from your chest and assume the unshakable posture of the architect of the now, you must master the alchemy of perception. You must learn to intercept the physical event before it contaminates your blood. You must take that raw mass of kinetic energy that the world throws at you and forge a new meaning. Placing it upon the anvil of your mind, you must strike it with the hammer of your will until you forge a meaning that serves you exclusively. You are no longer a passive receptor of tragedies. You are a devourer of friction who transmutes poison into jet fuel. Visualize the immensity of a dark ocean, lashed by a maximum category hurricane. Waves rise like mountains of black water, the wind howls with a violence that deafens, and atmospheric pressure crushes everything in its path. In the midst of this hell of fluids, two vessels sail. In the first ship is the inertial captain, the slave of his own emotions. When the gale hits his ship, this man falls to his knees. He looks at the black sky and screams, blaming the ocean for its cruelty. He cries for the injustice of the storm. He lets go of the helm, hides in the bottom of the hold, and allows panic to dictate the meaning of the event. For him, the wind is a killer. The wind is a personal tragedy. By perceiving the storm as his enemy, his body freezes. His sails are torn by negligence, and the sea, blind and indifferent to his laments, ends up capsizing the ship and swallowing him into the abyss. The slave died believing the storm hated him when the storm did not even know of his existence. In the second ship, just a few miles away, stands the figure of the architect. The same gale hits his face, the same freezing rain soaks his clothes, and the same mountains of black water threaten to crush his deck. But the architect does not pray, he does not complain. He does not demand that the ocean calm down, because demanding that nature moderate its brutality is the plea of the weak. The architect knows the wind has no morality. The wind is raw, free, and colossal energy. With feet anchored in the wood and muscles tense, the architect turns the helm. He orders his crew to adjust the angle of the enormous heavy canvas sails. He does not flee the wind. He captures it. He takes that destructive force and uses it. Through the skill of his navigation and the tyranny of his perception, He forces it to fill his sails. The architect's ship creaks under the immense pressure, the mast bends, but the hurricane's energy is instantly transmuted into speed. The architect uses the ocean's rage to shoot toward his destiny at a speed he would never have reached. To the architect, the storm was not a tragedy. The storm was the greatest propulsion engine the universe could gift him. The three-dimensional event was exactly the same for both men, wind and water in motion. The difference between death at the bottom of the sea and escape velocity did not lie in meteorology. It lay in alchemy. The slave perceived a killer and found his grave. The architect perceived fuel and found his victory. That is the nature of your daily life in the 3D fabric of the market. Every time you receive a flat refusal, every time an iron door slams in your face, the universe is sending you a gust of gale force wind. The energy of the impact travels toward your chest, and in that millisecond of suspension, in that infinitesimal space between the blow and your reaction, resides all the power of the cosmos. The weak human takes that rejection and assigns it the weight of humiliation. He tells himself, I have failed. This means I am not good enough. This means I must abandon my dreams and return to the safety of mediocrity. By forging this toxic meaning, the slave ingests a paralyzing poison. His shoulders drop, his ribcage collapses, the testosterone in his blood evaporates, and his gaze loses all its edge. He has turned the energy of rejection into lead chains. The solitary king, trained in the metallurgy of perception, feels the same blow of rejection, but his lens is clean. When the market's refusal impacts his armor, the architect freezes time. He analyzes the blow with the clinical apathy of a surgeon, and immediately he wields the hammer of his will and strikes that event. He crushes that event on the anvil until giving it the exact shape of a marble step. The architect declares in the anechoic chamber of his mind, this rejection is not a humiliation. This rejection is the empirical confirmation that I have left the children's playground and am colliding with the barriers of titans. If they had not closed the door with this violence, it would mean I am aiming too low. This fall is a structural purge. The system has just revealed its operational flaws, so I can seal them with steel. This failure makes me a more lethal, sharper, and colder predator. By forging this absolute meaning, his physiology responds. Instead of shrinking, his sternum rises. His eyes take on the dark glint of mathematical obsession. The adrenaline of defeat does not become anxiety. It transmutes into a tactical and inexhaustible aggressiveness. He has taken the stone the world threw to wound him and used it to sharpen the edge of his own sword. The event is no longer dead weight. It is a compressed spring. You must understand that your consciousness operates like an optical crystal prism. When a beam of pure white light from the sun passes through a prism, the crystal has the power to refract that light, separating it into a range of distinct colors. The sunlight is the raw event. Bankruptcy, contempt, abandonment. It enters your mind as white light, lacking emotional color. It is the geometric design of your internal prism that decides what color it will project onto the walls of your reality. If your prism is carved by victimhood, you will project crises as burning red. The world will be stained with blood and terror. But if your prism is carved with the geometric mastery of quantum lead, you will take that same light of crisis, deflect it with elegance, and project it as a glacial blue of coldness, deep analysis, and absolute sovereignty. You have total control over the angles of the crystal. The universe simply provides the light. You are the one who paints the room. If the landscape of your current life seems depressing, threatening, or miserable, it is not because you are trapped in a dark cave. It is because the prism of your mind is designed to filter only the frequencies of defeat. You must destroy that prism. To achieve this transmutation in the trench of the real world, you must learn to practice psychological amputation. The inertial slave always asks, "Why me?" This is the most sterile, useless, and cowardly question a human can utter. It is the question of the prey looking at the jaws of the predator, hoping for an explanation. Seeking the why of a tragedy is an act of emotional indulgence. It is seeking excuses not to move. The architect of the now never asks why. The question, Y looks toward the past, and the past is a block of cold ash that generates no electricity. The architect looks at the smoking rubble of his failed project and asks, "What can I use this rubble for? What is the tactical utility of this pain?" That is the alchemist's question. That question forces your brain's machinery to abandon lament mode and turn on engineering mode. When you demand your perception find the utility of a humiliation, you are forcing the event to pay a toll. If pain crossed your border, it will not leave for free. You are going to squeeze every last drop of lesson, discipline, and ferocity that it contains in its atoms. Imagine the loudest and most brutal blacksmith shop of the medieval era. A piece of iron ore in its natural state is fragile, full of impurities, dirt, and slag. If you hit it against a wall, it will break into useless pieces. For that iron to become a sword capable of cutting bone and armor, it must be subjected to a thermodynamic hell. The blacksmith throws the iron into the furnace, heats it until it glows blinding white, and pulls it out with tongs. Then, he places it on the anvil. He begins to deliver devastating blows with a heavy hammer. Each strike deforms the metal. If the iron had consciousness and operated with the mentality of a weak human, it would cry in the forge. It would scream in pain. It would feel the fire, and blows are a divine punishment, an unjust tragedy, an attempt to destroy it. The iron would consider itself a victim of fate and beg for the blows to cease so it could return to its original form, cold and full of dirt. But the blacksmith does not hate the iron. The fire has no malicious intentions. The hammer blows are not a tragedy. They are the exact and necessary mechanism to expel impurities. Each impact sends sparks of slag flying, purifying the molecular matrix of the metal. The fire reorders the structure of the carbon atoms. Without that extreme pain, without that crushing atmospheric pressure and those ballistic impacts, the iron would never achieve the structural integrity to become tempered steel. The friction of your daily life, the pain of solitude, the abandonment by those you trusted, the economic suffocation that keeps you awake. All of that is the blacksmith's hammer. The universe is the forge, and you are the metal. When you learn to look at the blows from this architectural optics, fear disappears. You understand the cosmos is not punishing you, it is forging you. If you are receiving heavy blows, it is not because you are a failure whom life hates. It is because the universe, in its silent and lethal mathematics, has decided there is enough valuable material in you to put you in the furnace and temper you. It has decided to hammer away your fragility, your need for approval, and your cowardice to leave only the core of pure titanium. The alchemy of meaning requires you to develop a sacred arrogance. It requires you to look tragedy in the eye and snatch away its authority. If economic ruin visits you, do not bow your head. Raise your chin and decree, "This fire has stripped me of my attachments. Now I have nothing to lose. They have turned me into the most dangerous creature on the board." If absolute solitude envelops you because your vision is too large for your environment, do not cry for lack of company. Expand your ribcage and affirm, "Isolation is the vacuum chamber of titans. I have been set apart from the herd of mortals to sharpen my mind without the deafening noise of cowards." There is not a single scenario, not a single catastrophe in the 3D matrix that can resist the crushing pressure of this optics. By forging the weight of events, you become a whole. You become a thermodynamic black hole. Everything the world throws at you, praise or insults, money or debt, alliances or betrayals, is swallowed by your massive gravity, ground in the darkness of your mind, and turned into pure energy that fuels the reactor of your advance. The inertial slave is fragile because he needs ease. He needs external events to be favorable to feel strong. His happiness is a house built on quicksand, dependent on the tides of the weather. If it rains, he sinks. If the sun comes out, he smiles. He is a leaf swayed by the wind of circumstances. The architect of the now, mastering the alchemy of perception, is invulnerable. He has cast the foundations of his castle in the living rock of his own mind. He has understood the heretical and final truth of perception. I do not care in the slightest what the universe does, because I possess the absolute monopoly over what the acts of the universe mean. You can ruin me, and I will decide you made me stronger. You can betray me, and I will decide you taught me the anatomy of deception, so I never fall again. You can crush me, and I will decide the pressure turned me into a cutting diamond. By stealing from the world the power to dictate the meaning of its own acts, you have castrated adversity. You stripped its claws and teeth, leaving it as a simple, empty spectre that can only obey your orders. This is the true sovereignty of the king in the darkness of his forge chamber. It is not the magical power to prevent hurricanes. It is the relentless power to laugh in the midst of the wind and use the storm's fury to sharpen the sword. There is no force in this 3D simulation that can bend a man who has decided, with the coldness of 1,000 winters, that every tear, every wound, and every defeat is nothing more than the sacred toll he is paying to acquire his own divinity. Take control of the anvil. Lift the heavy hammer of your will. Stop waiting for matter to be favorable to you and start striking misfortune until forcing it to take the shape of your crown. The alchemy is yours. The lead awaits your order to transmute. Melt the world. Chapter 5. The Solar Furnace. The Thermodynamic Concentration of Attention. There is an invisible hemorrhage bleeding humanity dry at this very moment. It is a silent tragedy, a geological waste of such colossal proportions that, if measured in barrels of oil or tons of coal, we would declare the human species is committing mass thermodynamic suicide. The ordinary man, the 200-hertz slave wandering the streets complaining of poverty, luck, and market cruelty, walks through life carrying the most powerful nuclear reactor the cosmos has forged, his own conscious attention. However, this slave uses that majestic power with the same negligence as an idiot pouring liquid gold down a sewer. The slave wakes up, and instead of channeling the burning energy of his consciousness toward his empire, allows his attention to explode in 10,000 directions. Vital heat evaporates reading news of distant tragedies. Temperature dissipates through gossip. Atmospheric pressure leaks through envy, observing the lives of those he detests. His dying embers are spent worrying about a future that does not exist, or lamenting a past that is already cold ash. By noon, the slave sits before his work and wonders why he lacks the strength to advance. He wonders why projects stall and bank accounts freeze. The answer is mechanical. He is trying to boil the ocean with a wet match. The slave is like an incandescent bulb hanging in a vast, freezing industrial warehouse. The bulb emits light and heat in 360 degrees, throwing its energy in every direction. It vaguely illuminates the dust, but heats absolutely nothing. Its energy is dissipated, devoured by entropy. He radiates life force into nothingness. Then, shivering in his own mediocrity, he raises his fists and curses the gods because the warehouse remains frozen. The tyranny of the architect of the now begins with the relentless destruction of this diffuse light bulb. To abandon the realm of impotence, you must manipulate the light of your own consciousness like an optical engineer. You must understand that attention is not a passive function. It is the sacred currency of cosmic thermodynamics. It is the gravitational force that takes the mist of quantum possibilities and compresses it into rock, gold, or steel. In this universe, dense matter never surrenders to dispersion. It only melts before concentrated friction. To illustrate this principle, we must travel to the Pyrenees, where human engineering built a monument to the optics of power, the AUDIOBOOK solar furnace. Visualize a colossal structure of steel and glass embedded in a mountainside. It consists of thousands of mirrors tracking the sun, catching the ordinary light of the day. These mirrors redirect solar rays toward a building-sized parabolic mirror. Its terrifying genius is not that it generates its own energy. It simply takes sunlight, the same peaceful light that strokes your face in spring, and forces it, through tyrannical geometry, to converge into a single focal point the size of a cooking pot. In that tiny convergence point, peaceful light undergoes a demonic transmutation. Forced into such a small space, photons generate astronomical thermal friction. The temperature spikes above 3,500 degrees Celsius. It is a contained hell, a pure fire that requires no coal, no oil, and no gas. If engineers place a block of hardened steel there, the most resistant metal does not just heat up. It melts in seconds, dripping like cheap candle wax. If they place titanium, it evaporates. The solar furnace pulverizes any 3D obstacle because the absolute concentration of energy turns the ordinary into an unstoppable siege weapon. Your mind was designed by the architects of the universe to operate exactly like that 10-story solar furnace. The tragedy of your failure is that you have spent your life turning the mirrors outward, pointing them toward the trash of civilization, preventing the light from ever converging. The architect of the now is the absolute master of the parabolic mirrors of his own mind. When the solitary king decides to collapse a gigantic reality, to dominate an industry or forge a masterpiece, he does not get emotional. He does not jump for joy or shout hope. Hope scatters the light. He proceeds with clinical coldness. The first move to ignite the internal solar furnace is the total amputation of thermal leaks. The architect identifies every attention vampire. World news is a mirror pointing at nothing. He smashes it. Cowards advising realism are foggy glasses distorting the beam. He seals them out. Cheap entertainment is optical dross. With a tyranny the ordinary man would call sociopathic, the architect aligns the 10,000 mirrors of his perception toward a single goal, toward a single 3D coordinate. He closes the doors of his anechoic chamber. He cuts the communication cables with the matrix of mediocrity. And then he directs his entire intellectual bandwidth, emotional fury, gravitational weight, and quantum lead toward that single project. Imagine the silent violence of this act, the immensity of a human soul focused on the head of a pin. At first, matter resists. The physical world is inert, lazy, and dense. The project seems not to move. The market does not respond. The slave, in this position, would lose patience and turn his mirrors to something else, saying, "Optics don't work." But the architect knows the law of thermal lag in heavy materials. Steel does not melt the instant light touches it. It requires heat to accumulate. So the architect holds the magnifying glass. He keeps the point of light concentrated on the obstacle. He does not blink. His body may be tired, his eyes bloodshot, but his will is a block of cast iron. The immovability of the observer guarantees the concentration of the beam. If your hand trembles, the light moves. If your mind wanders, energy scatters and temperature drops. The steel of the obstacle cools and hardens again. Thermodynamic concentration demands a murderous stillness. You must look at the obstacle and force your consciousness not to look away until you see the smoke rising. And suddenly, collapse occurs. The 3D matter reaches its limit of structural resistance. The atmospheric pressure of your sustained attention is too brutal for the atoms of the market to bear. Friction breaks. Steel melts. The impossible project rights itself. The elite client yields to your weight and delivers capital. Bureaucratic walls disintegrate like rice paper before a flamethrower. Physical reality has curved, melted, and poured into the exact mold of your will, solely because you refuse to withdraw the concentration of your ocular beam. This is the raw physics of asymmetric creation. There is no muscular effort in holding a magnifying glass. Constant physical effort is the tool of the laborer. The architect does not spend kinetic energy, he manipulates the geometry of light. His effort lies in maintaining structural tension, in governing boredom and panic that try to make him turn his neck. We must enter the anatomy of distraction, for it is the most lethal weapon the external matrix uses against your fire. The inertial universe detests men who possess solar furnaces. The system is designed to feed on your dispersion. Giant corporations and decadent elites nourish themselves on the energy of diffuse bulbs. They need you scared, distracted, and depressed, for in that state of emotional entropy, you give away your vital energy. You are the firewood keeping others' castles warm. When you align your mirrors to heat your own empire, the matrix feels the supply cut, and the matrix will react. The moment you focus your lens, the matrix will send manufactured emergencies. A relative calls with drama. An appliance breaks. A political scandal demands your opinion. These are not random coincidences. They are tactical precision attacks designed to shake the hand holding the glass. They are desperate attempts by dense matter to prevent you from reaching melting temperature. If the architect succumbs to the vanity of being the savior of others' dramas, the light goes out. The combustion point vanishes. The masterpiece cools, and the steel of his victory rusts before being forged. To protect his reactor core, the solitary king must embrace the most misunderstood and sacred virtue of conquerors, tactical blindness and cruelty of focus. You must learn to look the chaos of the matrix in the eye and utter the most powerful word, no. A heavy, resounding, absolute no. I do not care about the drama of the economy. I do not care about the scandal of the week. My compassion is not an open door for thermal vampires to loot my engine room. My deepest compassion is becoming a torch so scorching that my existence lights the way for those willing to forge their own light. But to ignite that torch, I must first be selfish with my mirrors. I must be a tyrant with my bandwidth. Visualize the physics of an industrial laser. A laser is ordinary light forced to travel in one direction, with all waves in perfect coherence. If waves clash, it becomes a useless glow. While in phase, it cuts titanium like warm butter. Your consciousness is identical. When you harbor doubt, you break phase coherence. Part of your mind is focused on success, but another part whispers, "What if this fails?" That coward's whisper is a light wave traveling backward, causing destructive interference. Both waves cancel each other, energy is annihilated, and the laser loses its edge. You end up hitting metal with a wooden stick. Thermodynamic concentration demands the eradication of doubt through quantum lead. You cannot ignite the furnace if you secretly believe the sun might not have enough strength. The architect does not hope his beam works. He knows, with a boring and crushing mathematical certainty, that the laws of physics cannot fail. If I focus the light enough, the obstacle will burn. It is a law. There is no room for the obstacle's opinion. To achieve this density of focus, you must strip your attention of all agitated emotion. The novice's mistake is believing concentration requires frowning and gritting teeth. That is nervous tension, which burns glucose. The architect focuses from a state of deep parasympathetic relaxation. It is the monolithic gaze of an ambush predator. The crocodile does not sweat while watching its prey. His body is motionless, saving energy. His heartbeat is slow, but his eyes contain the absolute violence of imminent death. All consciousness is projected onto a single point of space-time. When the millisecond arrives, the explosion of energy is total and precise. One strike, and the battle ends. You must train your biological machinery to imitate this thermodynamic ambush. When you sit in your command chair to design your empire, you cannot arrive dragging the day's distractions. Apply a pressurization protocol. Close the physical door, close the chemical door of cheap dopamine, throw your phone in a drawer. Then, close the geometric door of your mind. Visualize the 10,000 mirrors in your mind, each pointing at a fear or memory, and one by one, force them to turn. Hear the metallic creak as the heavy plates of your mirrors rotate and align. Point every single one toward the center of the room, toward the crucible of your goal. Feel the heat rise in your chest. Feel the cold dispersion of fear replaced by the lethal fever of single purpose. You are withdrawing energy from alternative timelines where you fail. You are absorbing the photons of your mediocre parallel lives and injecting them all into this single point of the now. The room floods with an invisible glow. Silence becomes thick. You have become a gravitational vortex. Your entire being, your intellect, and the crushing weight of your basal ganglia are converging on your fingertips. And in that state of dictatorial grace, you attack. You drop the magnifying glass onto the material. You work in a state of uninterrupted flow. The flesh does not tire. Hours disintegrate. Because all perception is collapsed into one point, the illusion of 3D time ceases to exist. You enter the timeless chamber of the gods, the space of hyper-efficiency where a man in pure thermal concentration can build in 6 hours what a slave could not assemble in 10 years. When the steel of the obstacle surrenders and you see the solution flow like liquid metal, do not celebrate with hysteria. Do not act like a beggar surprised by a gold coin. Withdraw the glass slowly. Observe the smoking crater your consciousness just pierced in the barrier of the impossible. Nod in silent sovereignty. Understand that this is what happens when the ordinary man stops crying about the coldness of the universe and decides to become the sun. Stop lighting the dust of useless corners. Stop giving your light to shadows. Maintain the beam until reality has no choice but to take the form of your crown. Chapter 6. Tactical Blindness. The Military Art of Ignoring. There is a massive perversion in contemporary civilization, a poisonous doctrine that disguises itself as virtue and demands that men keep their eyes wide open before the totality of the world's chaos. You have been indoctrinated since childhood with the pathetic idea that being informed and empathetic is the duty of a civilized human. They demand that you look at economic crises, listen to the sterile debates of the crowd, and participate with your anxiety in the collective mourning of a society that loves to wallow in its own mud. The 200 Hz inertial slave obeys this order with repulsive submission. He wakes up and swallows the black smoke of generalized panic. He watches news of ruin, listens to the murmurs of frightened co-workers, and allows the hostility of the 3D climate to flood his ribcage. He believes in his vast optical ignorance that by looking at all these threats, he is protecting himself from them. He believes that knowing the abyss will save him from falling into it. Thermodynamic physics and fluid mechanics teach us exactly the opposite. In the science of heat, there is a non-negotiable principle called the second law of thermodynamics, which dictates that when two bodies with different temperatures come into contact, heat will always flow from the hotter body to the colder body until they reach equilibrium. Your attention, the beam of light of your consciousness, is the physical bridge of contact between your internal fire and the external matter. If you, carrying the incandescent fire of an empire under construction, decide to rest your gaze upon the dead ice of someone else's complaint or the panic of your competitors, you have built a bridge. You are not being an informed citizen. You are taking the molten gold of your life force, the heat you should be using to forge the steel beams of your own castle, and you are pouring it directly into the frozen abyss of collective mediocrity. Your temperature drops, your blood cools, your will rusts. You level with the dead frequency. You have been looted in broad daylight, and you were the one who handed the keys to the thief by lending him your attention. For the architect of the now, the lone monarch operating under the unshakable laws of elite physics, perception is not a free right. It is a heavy capital investment. The architect knows the world is noise. The architect knows the universe is an infinite ocean of stimuli, and 99% of those stimuli are white noise, entropic dross designed to consume energy without producing any value. Therefore, the central pillar upon which the Titan erects his invulnerability is the cold and sociopathic mastery of tactical blindness. Tactical blindness is the military art of visually and auditorily amputating everything that does not contribute to the gravitational density of your empire. It is the ability to walk through a burning battlefield surrounded by explosions and fleeing soldiers, and force your retinas to register nothing but the geometry of your goal. To materialize this discipline in the rawness of anatomy, we must observe the brilliance of equestrian engineering. Observe a thoroughbred racehorse, a magnificent biological miracle of tense muscle and steel tendons. This animal was designed by genetics for a single purpose: pure kinetic acceleration in a straight line. However, despite its immense physical power, the horse is a prey animal. Its primitive brain, its amygdala, is programmed to panic at sudden movements or lateral threats. If you place this indomitable beast at the starting line of a deafening racetrack, surrounded by the roar of thousands of spectators and erratic horses, it would collapse. Its nervous system would be flooded with toxic adrenaline. Its gaze would spiral out of control, jumping frantically from one threat to another. It would lose the rhythm of its stride, and the race would end in a catastrophe of broken bones and dust, not for lack of strength, but because of an overdose of perception. What is the solution that the master trainer applies to save the Titan from its own biology? He places thick black leather blinders on the sides of its eyes. The blinders are not a punishment. They are optical isolation shielding. They are pieces of armor designed specifically to completely block the animal's peripheral vision. By wearing this heavy leather upon its temples, the horse is plunged into absolute lateral blindness. It can no longer see the crowd waving their arms. It cannot see if the horse on the right is approaching dangerously or if the horse on the left has stumbled. The totality of the world's chaos is erased from its physical reality. By blocking the entry of useless light, the trainer forces the animal's optics to collapse into a single narrow tunnel of frontal vision. The only thing the beast can see is the clear track and the distant finish line. By releasing it from the thermodynamic burden of observing distraction, the horse's amygdala relaxes, panic vanishes. The nervous energy that would have been wasted on terror is massively and instantaneously redirected toward the lungs and hooves. When the gates open, the beast explodes forward like a ballistic missile, indifferent to death and noise, devouring the distance in a state of lethal and silent concentration. Your mind, in the heat of the three-dimensional market, is that racehorse. The market is the track full of traps. Your competitors are the other sweaty and erratic horses trying to block your path. If you try to run this race with your eyes wide open, turning your neck to see what your rival is doing, you are committing suicide. Your kinetic energy will be torn to shreds. You will trip over the friction of the environment and be trampled by the inertia of the herd. The architect of the now must forge his own blinders of leather and lead. He must learn to mutilate his field of vision. The execution of tactical blindness does not require a cave. It requires something much more violent. It requires you to learn to be physically present in a room full of panic, and yet manage to keep your consciousness isolated in a hermetic vault, deaf and blind to the drama unfolding a meter from your skin. It is the dictatorial ability to look at crisis and deny it the status of reality. When in a board meeting or a social circle, someone of low vibration begins to distill their poison, complaining that the country is sinking or that money is scarce, the educated slave nods his head. The slave offers his empathy. He absorbs the acoustic waves of fear and allows that poison to infiltrate his thoughts. The solitary king calls this an unacceptable hemorrhage. When the sound waves of scarcity and complaint reach the architect's eardrum, tactical blindness activates like a titanium clockwork mechanism. The architect does not debate. He does not try to convince the idiot he is wrong, because debating is a loss of energy. The architect applies the vacuum. Physically, his gaze loses focus on the speaker. His eyes adopt the glacial, heavy, and opaque quality of frosted glass. His breathing slows down, adopting the deep and bored rhythm of quantum lead. He closes the floodgates of his emotional absorption. He hears the noise as irrelevant wind. The complaints and fears bounce off the density of his tactical apathy without penetrating the crust of his skin. The architect responds with a prolonged, deadly dense silence, or with a simple, expressionless nod that neither approves nor condemns. Finding no resonance, the low-frequency individual suffocates in the lack of response. He feels the abyssal cold of the king's disinterest, and out of pure thermodynamic discomfort, he retreats, taking his acoustic trash elsewhere. The architect has defended the purity of his castle without even drawing his sword. He has won the war simply by refusing to look at the enemy. We must delve into mythology to understand the exact mechanism of this optical negation. The ancient Greeks, who understood deep psychology better than modern science, encoded the terror of passive perception in the myth of the Gorgon Medusa. The legend describes a monster whose curse was of an absolute optical lethality. Any living being that committed the error of looking her directly in the eyes was instantaneously petrified, turned into a cold, grey and dead stone statue for eternity. The three-dimensional matrix surrounding you is Medusa. The 24-hour news cycle, fueled by terror and financial catastrophe, is the face of the beast. The forecasts of failure from your critics are the snakes hissing on her head. Each time you cede to the morbid temptation of staring at the crisis, each time you fix your eyes on the misery of your bank account and let yourself be dragged by the narrative of disaster, you are looking into the eyes of Medusa. The myth is fulfilled with the rigor of a physical law. You turn to stone. Paralysis seizes your limbs. Fear injects concrete into your joints. Your ability to take tactical decisions, to innovate, or to move with the fluidity of water solidifies into a heavy block of inertia. You remain frozen in time, petrified by tragedy. How did the hero Perseus defeat the monster? He did not do it by being stronger, nor by closing his eyes to fight blind. He did it by using the polished bronze shield given to him by the goddess of wisdom. Perseus advanced toward Medusa, walking with his back to the beast. He refused to look at the face of tragedy head-on. He used the brilliant reflection of his shield to calculate the geometric distance and exact position, obtaining only the raw logistical and mathematical data necessary for the attack, completely filtering out the paralyzing terror. Guided by that indirect optics, he dealt the decapitating blow. That polished bronze shield is your tactical blindness combined with your analytical surface power. The architect of the now never ignores the raw data of the chessboard, but he flatly refuses to look at the emotional burden that the matrix adds to that data. He filters the panic and mutilates the indignation. If tax laws change and threaten to gnaw at the capital of your empire, you do not bury your head in the sand. That is not tactical blindness, that is inertial cowardice. What you do is raise the bronze shield. You observe the new law not as a personal tragedy, but as a simple variation in the topography of the terrain. You do not stop to weep for the injustice of the system. You limit yourself to absorbing the cold, numerical, and mechanical data of the situation. You calculate the evasion maneuver, call your tax advisors, and strike the sword blow that neutralizes the threat. You have defeated the crisis without ever crossing eyes with fear. The military art of ignoring reaches its zenith when you apply dictatorial blindness toward the useless progress of others. Envy, that cheap and viscous emotion that devours the oxygen of weak minds, is born exclusively from an error in the configuration of the microscope. It is a supreme treason against your sovereignty. When you turn the lens of your perception to observe how another man's empire is growing faster than yours, you have taken the light of your solar furnace and directed it toward your neighbor's forge. By thinking obsessively about someone else's success, you are giving your energy to their matrix of reality. Tactical blindness demands that you build immense, opaque walls on the sides of your own kingdom. There is no time, voltage, or interest to audit the account books of others. The solitary king competes only against the inertia of the universe and his own weakness. He continues striking the chisel with a psychopathic monotony. When you master this ability to ignore, you discover an amazing physical property. The act of voluntary blindness creates a massive vacuum around you. And as we have established, nature abhors a vacuum. When you empty your visual field of useless dramas and politics, you leave your hall of mirrors completely clear. In that vast, heavy, and resonant silence, the only image that can occupy the space is the image you decide to project from the core of your intention. The architecture of your empire becomes the only reality available to your senses. By not looking at anything other than victory, you force the field to collapse its waves. Do not feel guilt for turning your back on the burning city of civilization. It is not your duty to put out the fires that idiots started playing with matches. Your only responsibility is to climb the highest mountain of solitude, erect a fortress of black stone, and illuminate the night with the violence of your own fire. Put on the blinders! Close the iron floodgates! Deafen your ears to the murmur of the inertial corpses complaining in the mud, and turn your gaze away from Medusa. The path to the throne is straight, dark, and admits no distractions. Ignore everything but the crown, and the crown will be the only matter reality can manifest. Chapter 7. The Mirage of Terror. Dismantling the Shadows. You have reached the most hostile frontier of your own biology. Throughout your life, you have been conditioned to believe that fear is a sacred messenger, a wise instinct that warns you of imminent danger and demands your most absolute obedience. You have been taught to respect your fears and to retreat when the dark mist of uncertainty rises. The inertial civilization, composed of billions of 200 Hertz slaves, has built entire cathedrals dedicated to the cult of fear. They buy insurance against failure, design their lives around risk avoidance, and congratulate each other on being prudent, when in reality they are just paralyzed, frozen by panic toward a universe they do not understand. It is imperative that we take this repulsive veneration for fear and shatter it under the weight of cold logic and mechanical optics. The fear you experience when you try to build an empire, when you risk your capital, or when you expose yourself to the judgment of the crowd, is not a prophecy of the universe. It is not a mystical warning. Fear, in its purest atomic structure, is simply a mirage, a miscalculation in the ancient machinery of your primitive brain. It is an optical illusion projected onto the canvas of your mind by a survival instinct that evolved to protect you from lions on the savannah, but which today is tragically incompetent at reading modern data. Your carbon vehicle was assembled over millions of years in an environment of extreme physical violence. In the primitive jungle, if a bush moved in the dark, the biological optics of your ancestors were forced to exaggerate the threat. The mammalian brain did not have the luxury of serene investigation. It had to assume it was a lethal predator. The defense mechanism was based on the absolute magnification of terror. The brain injected boiling adrenaline into the blood, contracted muscles, turned off the frontal lobe, the seat of logical reasoning, and forced the body to flee or fight blindly. This kept you alive as a species, but today it is the silent killer of your greatness. The catastrophic problem occurs when this animal instinct, designed to deal with tigers and stone chasms, tries to process the abstract information of a financial market or the rejection of an authority figure. The primitive brain does not know the difference between a carnivorous predator and an empty bank account. It has no capacity to distinguish. To your ancient biology, both are the end of the world. Because of this optical incompetence, your instinct takes tiny, banal, and easily calculable threats, places them in front of the lens of your perception, and magnifies them until they become apocalyptic monsters. To understand the mechanics of this illusion, we must enter a crude analogy. Visualize a tribe of primitive humans huddled at the back of a damp cave with black stone walls. Outside, the night is absolute. In the center of the cavern burns a single flickering tallow candle, the tribe's only source of light and heat. The humans are terrified of the outside world and barely dare to breathe. Suddenly, from between the cracks in the rock closest to the candle, emerges a tiny rodent, a fragile and harmless mouse. The mouse walks slowly in front of the candle flame, looking for crumbs on the floor. But due to the inflexible laws of geometric optics, the proximity of the mouse to the light source causes a monstrous projection. The small figure blocks the photons, and on the immense and distant back wall of the cave, a gigantic shadow is projected. The imperfections of the rock distort the edges of the shadow, giving it sharp claws and a bestial profile. The shadow of a 5-meter monster towers over the tribe. What is the reaction of the inertial slaves? The men and women of the tribe fall to their knees, sobbing, screaming in terror, and begging for mercy. They believe, with an empirical faith based on what their retinas are observing, that a colossal demon inhabits the cave and is about to slaughter them. The terror is so real in their bodies that their hearts beat to the point of bursting. They take decisions based on the shadow. They sacrifice their food and surrender before the immensity of the dark wall, all because they refuse to turn around and look for the source of the anomaly. The ordinary man living in the modern world is an inhabitant of this same cave. You have lived in this cave. When the specter of economic ruin or the terror of what people will say rises before you, you are looking at the back wall of the cavern. Your mammalian brain, lacking the light of cold logic, takes the little mouse of a financial setback and projects it against the wall of your imagination, creating a devastating shadow. In this shadow, you lose your house, your family abandons you, and you die of hunger in absolute misery. Facing this monstrous projection, your physical body reacts exactly as if the monster were breathing on your neck. You feel cold sweat. You feel thermodynamic suffocation in your chest. You shrink. You surrender. You cancel your project. You convince yourself that retreating is the safest thing, when in reality you have just surrendered your crown to an illusion of light and shadow that completely lacks physical mass. The tyranny of the architect of the now begins at the exact moment he decides to challenge the wall of shadows. The architect is not a man devoid of biology. He also possesses a primitive brain and experiences the chemical impact of the shadow. When the architect risks his capital and the market plummets, his amygdala triggers the same alarm. The shadow of the monster rises in his own cave. But here lies the structural separation between Titan and slave. The slave looks at the shadow and kneels. The architect looks at the shadow and experiences deep intellectual disgust toward the geometric distortion. He knows, with the certainty of a physicist, that a shadow of that size is mathematically impossible unless the source is artificially close to the fire of his own anxiety. The architect applies tactical blindness to the back wall. He refuses to dialogue with the shadow. You cannot stab a shadow to death, you cannot negotiate with it, and you cannot flee from it, because a shadow is not an entity. It is the absence of a vacuum. The only logical move is to turn around and walk toward the light source. This is the act of the logical audit, the clinical dissection of terror. Visualize the heavy, metallic, and monotonous steps of the architect in the darkness of the cavern. As the crowd moans behind him, he walks toward the candle of his own consciousness. As he nears the fire, the illumination becomes rawer, harder, and devoid of romance. And there, bathed in the yellow light, he discovers the true agent of his panic, the small, fragile, and pathetic mouse. That mouse is financial bankruptcy. That mouse is the criticism of your neighbors. That mouse is the client's rejection. The architect takes the mouse in his hands and examines it under his superior intellect. He realizes the farce. Financial bankruptcy is not a soul-devouring monster. It is simply a temporary mismatch in capital flow that can be resolved through legal restructuring and an aggressive injection of new effort within 6 months. It is a problem of mathematical logistics. Public criticism is not a destroying demon. It is just a handful of acoustic waves emitting vibrations in the air from people who lack the courage to build anything of their own. It is a harmless phenomenon that cannot pierce the steel of his self-esteem. By auditing the threat and stripping it of distance, the optical distortion collapses. The monster dies. It dies because the light has revealed that the monster never existed. With a movement devoid of all emotion, with a bureaucratic and bored coldness, the architect throws the mouse away from the fire or crushes it under his boot without even altering the rhythm of his breathing. The shadow instantly disappears from the cavern wall. The tribe stops screaming. Terror evaporates into the void, leaving behind only the dense and productive atmosphere of stillness. Mastery of dismantling shadows demands that you incorporate this lighting protocol into every second of your operation. You must never allow fear to live in the darkness of the undefined. Fear feeds on mist. It grows, swells, and acquires terrifying shapes when you refuse to look it in the eye and define its real physical dimensions. The slave suffers from chronic anxiety because he never defines exactly what he fears. He just feels a generalized anguish about failing. It becomes a gigantic shadow. The architect is obsessed with perimeter definition. When the architect feels the lash of fear, he stops the gears of his mental factory dictatorially. He isolates himself in his forging chamber, turns on the industrial floodlights of his logical reasoning, and demands that his biology materialize the monster on the table. The architect writes with geometric violence, "What is the exact threat measured in weight and centimeters that is paralyzing me at this moment?" If it is the fear of launching a new business, he dissects it. The fear is that the product generates 0 sales. Once defined, he illuminates it even more closely. He submits it to the test of thermodynamic fire. What is the real physical and structural damage if this threat materializes? The damage is that I will have lost 600 hours of work and $3,000. Does this damage threaten my cellular integrity? No. Can I absorb this tactical blow and keep breathing? Yes. It is a minor logistical loss, recoverable in a single quarter of raw acceleration. By writing these words, by forcing terror to assume the form of a simple profit and loss statement, fear is stripped of its demonic aspect. The beastly shadow is reduced to the harmless figure of a logistical mouse. The architect has turned on the light. This process of lighting destroys the thermodynamic root of human suffering. Suffering does not come from the physical pain of life's impacts. Suffering is almost exclusively the result of the energy waste you use to fight against imaginary projections. You spend industrial amounts of ATP tensing your neck muscles for a ghost. You prepare for a blow that is never going to arrive, or that, if it arrives, is 1,000 times softer than your shadow made you believe. The true optics of power consist of recognizing that the three-dimensional matrix is, in its fundamental state, a deeply boring and neutral place. Terror is an invention of the internal cinema. The true crises that destroy empires rarely come wrapped in black clouds and thunder. They are usually small logistical oversights, water leaks in the hull of the vessel that were ignored because the captain was too busy looking at imaginary monsters in the sky. When you clear your lens, your vision becomes glacially pragmatic. You realize there are no invisible enemies, no generational curses, and no evil economy. There is only a mathematical equation of causes and effects. You understand that if you inject density, concentration, and ballistic repetition, matter will respond by giving you gold, because physics cannot help but yield to mass. If you retreat from a project for fear of your family's criticism, you are surrendering the crown of your empire to the vocal cords of other human beings. You are allowing the expulsion of air through the larynx of an individual to acquire the density of an iron hammer and smash your walls. It is a shameful optical error. The solitary king never yields sovereignty to the acoustic shadow of another person. By mastering the mirage of terror, you develop a dense and heavy apathy toward the drama of the masses. You walk through the criticisms of society with the same indifference as a titanium battleship breaking through a bank of sea fog. The fog looks threatening from afar, but when the steel cuts through it, the fog dissipates, proving it never had the mass necessary to offer structural resistance. Your unnegotiable obligation is to become a relentless hunter of your own illusions. You cannot afford the luxury of ignorance. You cannot afford the comfort of sitting at the back of the cave. Your duty is to take the torch of cold intellect and walk directly toward each of the shadows that have dictated the limits of your growth. Walk toward the shadow of rejection. Walk toward the shadow of economic failure. As you approach the fire that projects that optical deformity, demand with the tyranny of an emperor that reality show you the true atomic structure of the threat. Dismantle the projections. Turn off the projector of mammalian hysteria. Turn on the industrial spotlights of the mathematical audit. When light floods the cavern of your mind, you will discover the greatest hidden treasure of perception, the vacuum of the threat. You will realize that the world was never a dangerous place for those who know how to look. The danger was always ignorance. Purge the fear and move your pieces with mathematical precision. Chapter 8. The Resonance of Abundance, Tuning the Instrument. There is a truly pathetic spectacle repeated daily in the streets, markets, and corridors of world trade. It is the vision of the inertial slave chasing wealth with the desperation of a starving animal. This individual has been taught, from the ignorance of the culture of brute effort, that success and money are entities out there. Under this illusion of distance, the slave deduces that the only way to close the gap is absolute thermodynamic attrition. He runs, sweats, pleads, sends hundreds of frantic messages, and burns his vital energy in an endless hunt. He acts like a man trying to catch the wind with bare hands. The more he runs, the more wealth avoids him. This tragedy is born from a deep illiteracy regarding the architecture of the universe and the laws of wave mechanics. The slave ignores that abundance and asymmetric opportunities are not skittish prey to be hunted with spears. They are gravitational masses. They are vibratory frequencies. In wave fields, frantic movement proves misalignment. The one who runs desperately after gold is emitting through every pore and every heartbeat the sharp, screeching, and chaotic frequency of scarcity. His body screams, "I don't have it, I am empty, I am starving." And the universe, a resonance chamber of terrifying acoustic perfection, hears that frequency and returns exactly the same melody. The architect of the now, the monarch who rules his destiny from the stillness of his throne, despises the hunt. He understands that chasing matter is an undignified surrender. The architect does not run toward the empire. The architect anchors his feet in the bedrock, adjusts his internal strings, and uses resonance to force the empire to him. To understand this frictionless domination, we must dive into the purity of the physics of sound. We must enter the cathedral of sympathetic resonance. Imagine the central nave of a millennial Gothic cathedral, built with solid stone blocks and immense vaults designed to manipulate sound. In the center rests a tempered steel tuning fork. This instrument is forged with absolute mathematical precision to vibrate at exactly 440 Hertz. 50 meters away, at the other end of the cathedral, there are dozens of other tuning forks and bells of different sizes. Some are tuned to C, others to E, and only one of them is tuned exactly to the same A note. In this scene of absolute stillness, a master strikes the first tuning fork with a dry, heavy blow. The steel awakens and begins to vibrate violently. There are no cables or physical strings connecting this fork to the objects across the hall. However, the vibrating steel pushes the air molecules. It creates invisible pressure waves. When those acoustic waves cross the nave and hit the distant instruments, the non-negotiable miracle of physics occurs. The bells tuned to C receive the impact, but their atomic structure is incompatible with that vibration. They remain mute. The wave passes through them without generating the slightest friction or response. But when the invisible wave caresses the steel of the second tuning fork, the one tuned to the exact same note, the magic of thermodynamics is unleashed. Without anyone having touched it, this second fork begins to vibrate on its own. It begins to sing. It emits its own energy, responding to its twin's call through the immense void. They have been entangled by sympathetic resonance. The first instrument did not have to cross the room or plead with the second to sound. It simply held its own frequency with such intensity and purity that it forced everything sharing its geometric nature to awaken and resonate in absolute submission. Your carbon body and, above all, the heavy muscle of your heart make up the most sophisticated and massive tuning fork in nature. You are an acoustic instrument designed to emit waves of gravity and electromagnetism. Your past tragedy was allowing the external world to tune your strings. You allowed fear to tighten your neck muscles. An instrument tense with panic emits a sharp, shrill, and weak note. When you walk through the world vibrating in the note of terror of losing, your waves travel through your industry and negotiations. Abundant resources and high-frequency people are tuned to a grave, heavy, and majestic note. When your screech hits them, there is no response. They ignore you. They pass by like the mute bells of the cathedral. You only attract by sympathetic resonance other frightened individuals and cheap clients who haggle over your value. They are the only ones tuned to your same pathetic frequency. The alchemy of abundance demands that you assume tyranny over your own strings. You must become the luthier of your own soul. If you want 3D reality to hand you the gold from its vaults, you must learn to emit the note of gold before having a single coin in your hand. This specific vibration of extreme wealth is not the hysterical euphoria that the weak confuse with happiness. It is the frequency of structural gratitude. We must strip the word gratitude of the cheap mysticism and sticky weakness that has contaminated it. The slave's gratitude is a trembling emotion, a disguised plea. The slave joins his hands and says, "Thank you for what I have." But deep down, there is a seething terror of losing it. That is the sound of disguised beggary. The architect's gratitude is a cold, calculating inventory. It is the thermodynamic sensation of absolute possession. Think of the monarch who descends to his vaults to review his gold reserves. He does not jump for joy. He walks with majestic apathy. He observes the wealth that belongs to him, and his breathing is deep, rhythmic, and lazy. That feeling of extreme normalcy, that dead weight in the ribcage from knowing resources are unlimited and locked away, is the acoustic resonance of abundance. It is quantum lead applied to matter. To tune your instrument, you must subject your body to a regime of incessant gravitational simulation. You cannot wait for the money to arrive. If you wait for matter to give you permission to vibrate, you are a reactionary slave. You have to generate the tone in the tuning fork before the cathedral walls return the echo. This is executed in the solitude of your isolation. You sit in silence and force your imagination to build the architecture of your final triumph. Do not imagine it as a fuzzy dream in the future. Observe it as a photographic memory of the past. Visualize the final contract or the crushing of your competition. While holding that vision, order your body to submit to the geometry of that reality. Drop your shoulders. Expand your sternum with the expansion of one who has no threats. Force your heart to beat with glacial slowness. Bathe in the absolute certainty that the battle ended years ago, and you are now only managing the spoils of your own victory. By forcing your biology to maintain this structural tension, your body obeys and begins to emit the grave, heavy, and deafening note of sovereignty. You become the tuning fork of abundance. Once the note sounds in the core of your chest, you never turn it off. You walk into the street and sit at the negotiation table without allowing your tuning to alter 1 millimeter. This is where the universe reveals its nature as obedient machinery. As your wave travels, the impact is devastating. You enter a boardroom and you do not need to shout or use cheap sales tricks. The heavy frequency of your ribcage floods the room. Those operating in frequencies of stress feel the shock of your shockwave. Their nervous systems, by pure biological inertia, are dragged to synchronize with the most massive object in the room. Just as the steel fork forces air to move to its rhythm, your cold lead resonance forces the heartbeats of those around you to calm down and submit to your tempo. They feel your invisible abundance. They sense, at a cellular level, that you do not need their money and that your empire is already built. In fluid physics, water always flows toward the point of least resistance and greatest gravity. Capital and power operate exactly the same. Money does not flow to the desperate because desperation is friction. It is a wall of resistance that repels matter. Capital is a cowardly fluid that seeks security, weight, and density. By resonating in structural gratitude, you become a gravitational basin. The money of investors and the talent of employees fall toward you by pure inertia because your frequency is the safest and most stable in the ecosystem. Mastery of this resonance grants you an almost unfair military advantage, the ability to operate in disaster. The architect's true metallurgy is tested when external reality tries to tune your instrument with the hammer of tragedy. Suddenly, a vital client withdraws or an ally betrays you. The 3D matrix strikes the tuning fork of your chest, trying to force you to sound the note of panic. In this millisecond, the false king crumbles. He feels the blow, allows fear to tighten his muscles, and begins to vibrate in scarcity. He despairs and accelerates his fall, confirming he was always a beggar disguised as a monarch. The architect of the now receives the impact with an open chest and refuses to change his note. His resonance box is armored. When economic loss hits him, the architect does not react by contracting. He uses his willpower to maintain the relaxation of his shoulders. While his bank numbers drop, he imposes the physical memory of infinite abundance on his biology. He declares, "This loss is a negligible tax payment to the chaos of the universe. The source of my wealth is not in that client's accounts. The source is the electromagnetic density of my own chest, and this density has not decreased a single hertz." By maintaining perfect tuning in the hurricane, the architect defies the logic of matter. He creates a high-pressure bubble around himself. The 3D universe, confused by this lack of thermal reaction, is forced to balance the equation. If the loss of $1 million failed to alter the observer's vibration, the matrix assumes a logistical error occurred. The architect's waves continue to travel, heavy and dominant. In a short time, a new route collapses. A larger investor or a superior contract arises from the ashes to fill the empty space. Gold returns with interest, violently attracted by the only force it cannot resist. The unalterable magnetism of a mind that never recognized the possibility of lack. Your work is the obsessive maintenance of your frequency. You are an instrument of war and creation placed in the center of the cosmic cathedral. If you spend your days out of tune, reacting to shadows and resonating with complaints, your symphony will be a pathetic screech lost in the dark. You will be ignored by greatness and trampled by time. But if you isolate yourself from entropy and install the coldness of a king in your nervous system, you will have decoded the source code of the matrix. Every word you utter and every silence you keep will be charged with a geometric and irresistible shockwave. You will not have to chase money. Money will feel your gravity. You will not have to plead for loyalty. Strong men always surrender to the atmospheric pressure of an authority that does not doubt itself. Tune your instrument like an engineer adjusting the cables of a suspension bridge. Strike the tuning fork of your chest and then assume the majesty of stillness. Watch the universe sing your name. Chapter 9. The Torsion Anchor, the Gravity of Certainty. There is a poisonous doctrine, a disease of perception that has infected entire civilizations and is celebrated upon the altars of mediocrity as if it were the greatest of human virtues. It is the disgusting and fragile glorification of hope. The 200 Hertz inertial slave has been taught that his duty is to have faith and cross his fingers. From the relentless perspective of gravitational physics, thermodynamics, and the strength of materials, this emotional posture is structural suicide. Hope is the vibration of beggars. It is a high-friction frequency, unstable, volatile, and lacking all mass. When you desire something with desperation, you declare an absolute vacuum. You are sending an acoustic wave that screams, "I do not possess this. I am an empty vessel." The physical universe is not a compassionate entity, but a geometric mirror of lethal precision. It does not respond to your tears or the nobility of your intentions. The universe responds exclusively to gravity. It returns only more lack and waiting. The architect of the now despises hope with deep intellectual disgust. The architect does not desire the empire, for desire is the metric of those who do not possess. The solitary king has extirpated from his biology the need to plead with time. Instead, he operates from a perception known to the science of titans as quantum lead. Quantum lead is the bored, bureaucratic and geological certainty that your victory is a fait accompli. It is not hysterical joy. It is the monolithic stillness of an emperor who knows with absolute mathematical precision that the lands already belong to him. The war to follow is merely a logistical formality to make official what is already won. To install this specific weight in your ribcage and abandon the fragility of hope, we must turn to naval engineering and fluid mechanics. Visualize the immensity of a dark, deep, and violent ocean. Upon the surface of this hostile sea floats a majestic 2,000-ton Spanish galleon built with heavy wood and reinforced with steel. The sky turns black, and a hurricane of devastating force begins to whip the surface. Liquid ice waves hit the hull with a violence that would splinter any lesser vessel. The wind howls, trying by all thermodynamic means to push the galleon toward the deadly reefs only a few kilometers away. The fury of the weather is blind and deaf. If the galleon were simply floating at the mercy of the current and the captain's hope, the wind would dash it against the rocks in minutes. But this galleon possesses a secret submerged in the abyss. Hours before the storm broke, the captain dictated an irrevocable order. An immense chain of forged iron links was released into the dark water. At the end of that chain descended a 3-ton solid steel anchor. It crashed into the seabed hundreds of meters below. It did not stop in soft sand. The steel flukes dug deep into the bedrock, into the geological crust of the planet, securing themselves with indestructible friction. Now, observe the physics of the surface world. The storm rages. The galleon creaks terrifyingly. It rises and falls with the tide, groaning under the water's impact. It seems it will be swept into annihilation, but it does not move from its spatial coordinate. No matter how much the wind pushes, the tension meets the bedrock. The anchor does not feel hope. It simply weighs. Because of the undeniable supremacy of its mass and geological grip, the ship remains exactly at the point the captain decided. That storm is your daily life in the 3D matrix. The giant waves are financial debts, client rejection, and the bureaucracy that delays your projects. The hurricane is the constant pressure of world inertia. The inertial slave is a ship without an anchor. When the first wave of an economic crisis hits, his perception panics. He lets himself be swept by the current of fear. He abandons his empire, lowers his prices, and ends up smashed against the rocks, cursing the storm, not realizing the sea destroys only those who drift. The architect of the now navigates the same storm, but his perception operates in the abyssal depths. Before looking at external reality, the architect descends to his mental anechoic chamber and drops the forged iron anchor. He decides the final result. He drives that order into his biology and the bedrock of the unified field. When the anchor of quantum lead is set, the architect returns to the surface and opens his eyes. The storm explodes. The bank account may show temporary red numbers. Investors may say no. Reality may hit the hull with a brutality that would make gods tremble. Here the miracle of human mental engineering occurs. By not yielding the mind while pushing the world in the opposite direction, a lethal physical phenomenon occurs: torsion tension. In mechanics, torsion happens when opposing forces pull at the same axis. Imagine a thick steel cable. One end is fixed to an immovable concrete wall, your anchor of absolute certainty. The other end is connected to an immense tractor pulling in the opposite direction, the resistance of the 3D world. The cable tightens to extreme rigidity. It emits a sharp metallic sound. The fibers twist under unbearable mathematical pressure. Someone has to yield. Either the wall breaks or the tractor engine explodes. This is the true trial by fire of your sovereignty. When you hold the image of victory but reality throws an unpayable bill or a bloody mockery in your face, structural torsion occurs. The world screams that you are a loser. Your mind, anchored in bedrock, affirms that gold is inevitable. Both cannot coexist in the same space-time. The steel cable of your nervous system is subjected to millions of pounds of pressure. The inertial slave cannot bear the torsion. He feels the sharp pain of contradiction, and his anchor breaks. He accepts defeat and says, "I have to be realistic." By yielding to the illusion of dense matter, the tractor of mediocrity drags him away. The solitary king bears the torsion with a clenched jaw and a sociopathic smile. The architect knows this unbearable tension is the exact geological metric confirming the spell is working. He knows 3D reality is heavy and dumb. It requires time to reorganize atoms. This lag is called the inertia of the hologram. While the world pushes toward failure, the architect entrenches himself in his anchor. He does not debate with the storm. He activates tactical blindness and floods his chest with an overdose of quantum lead. He refuses to accept the crisis as a final state. He perceives poverty as a mere bureaucratic delay in the delivery of his crown. The fundamental laws of thermodynamics intervene. Since the architect's consciousness is an atomic force of superior density, and since he refuses to let go, 3D reality reaches its breaking point. The tractor of the world cannot pull the concrete wall of your certainty. Reality collapses and reorganizes to align with you. To forge this level of gravity, you must root out your relationship with time. The slave looks at his dream and perceives it always in the future. By projecting the goal toward tomorrow, he commits an unforgivable optical error. Tomorrow is territory that never arrives. The body generates only the chemistry of anxiety. The architect of the now takes the colossal goal, tears it from the future line, and transports it violently into the past. He does not perceive his empire as a distant dream. He perceives it as a historical memory of something that has already happened. This is the alchemy of folded time for the frontal lobe. The human brain cannot biologically distinguish between a memory of a physical event from 10 years ago and a synthetic memory forged through brutal thermodynamic concentration. Both use the same neural networks. When you experience victory as a consumed event you are remembering, your blood chemistry alters irreversibly. Imagine the immense weight of your crown already resting on your head. If you assume this not as fantasy, but as a tactile, cold, and definitive memory, your biology changes. What does the body feel when remembering an absolute triumph? Not nervous anxiety. It feels the apathy of total security. The heart beats slow and grave. By holding this memory of the future, you create an indestructible torsion anchor. When the world tries to scare you with a crisis, you will look at it with the sovereign boredom of someone watching a rerun of an old movie. That majestic apathy is the signal that forces the unified field to accelerate the 3D delivery. The universe is an ocean of plastic energy, but it only respects mass. If you present yourself with the lightness of a feather, pushed by the wind of doubt, you will float in eternal mediocrity. You must learn to weigh. You must forge your perception with the hardness of an iron asteroid. It is not your job to discover how opportunities will materialize. The intellect that tries to control the how is a frightened intellect. Your only sacred responsibility is to define the what. Drop the iron anchor into the bedrock and sit on the deck watching the storm with a glacial smile. Endure the torsion of the cable. Feel matter stretch and groan under the pressure of your unmovable certainty. Do not offer the world a single blink of fear or a syllable of doubt. Let the hurricane exhaust itself. See yourself as the black hole that stays still, knowing its gravity will eventually drag the light to its core. Destroy hope and replace it with quantum lead. Transmute the anxiety of your future into the heavy memory of your success. Hold the anchor in the rock, endure the pull of the steel, and watch with the complacency of the gods as the mirage of external terror crumbles, surrendering unconditionally to your will. Chapter 10. The Observer's Crown, the King at his center. If your life continues to be an endless succession of combats, if you still feel that you must keep your fists up 24 hours a day so that your wealth does not evaporate, then you have not yet claimed the crown. You are still a gladiator in the arena, not the emperor in the grandstand. The final destination of quantum optics, the absolute zenith of the thermodynamics of human character, is a state of existence where linear effort and muscular attrition completely disappear. It is the sacred territory of zero friction. Reaching this threshold requires the demolition of the last and most deep-rooted illusion. As long as you continue to believe that the economy, clients, allies, and enemies exist out there, independent of your own gaze, you will be condemned to fatigue. Believing in separation is the optical error that forces you to run. But when the architect of the now adjusts his lens for the last time, the veil is torn. The universe reveals itself, not as a battlefield of stone and mud, but as an immense and perfect spherical hall of mirrors. The dense matter that surrounds you, the events that crash against your hull, are the acoustic echo and the strict optical reflection of the structure you harbor in your own mind. The universe is a passive canvas, an inert fluid that lacks its own voice. It can only sing the song you are playing on the tuning fork of your chest. If the melody of your life seems chaotic, filled with betrayals and scarcity, trying to change the outside world is an act of thermodynamic stupidity so vast it defies sanity. Imagine a man who stands before an immense silver glass mirror. The man frowns, clenches his fists, tenses his facial muscles in a mask of rage and terror, and looks at his reflection. Seeing the frightened monster in the glass, the man becomes enraged. He screams at the mirror, he strikes the glass surface. He tries to force the reflection to smile, to relax, to show him a face of victory and abundance. The man breaks his knuckles, bleeds on the glass, and exhausts himself until he faints, cursing the mirror for its stubbornness and cruelty. 99% of humanity lives and dies executing this dance of idiots. They kill themselves working in jobs they loathe, plead for attention, chase money, and fight against the economy, trying to break the glass with punches so that the image it returns is kinder. They ignore the most elementary law of optics. The reflection has no mass, no will, and no capacity to change by itself. The reflection is a slave to the object being projected. If you want the man in the mirror to smile with the peaceful arrogance of a king, the only mechanically valid action is to stop hitting the glass, step back, relax your own facial muscles, set the crown of certainty on your brow, and change your own physiognomy. In the exact millisecond you change, the mirror has no other mathematical choice but to obey and reflect the new order. When the architect understands this sovereignty, effort ceases. He abandons the external war and transfers the totality of his immense kinetic energy to the headquarters of his own center. To illustrate the physical texture and majesty of this operative state, we must travel to the 19th century, to the dark streets of an industrial European city in deep winter, and observe the sanctuary of a master watchmaker. Imagine the exterior. A sleet storm lashes the city. Black mud covers the streets. Inside a stone building, behind a thick oak door, lies the watchmaker's workshop. Crossing the threshold, the roar of the street vanishes, smothered by the acoustic insulation. The air inside is warm, dense, and smells of refined oil and clean brass. In the center, sitting at a solid wood bench, is the master. His back is straight. His breathing is so slow and rhythmic it barely moves his chest. He pays no attention to the thunder rattling the windows. The master wears a cylindrical magnifying loop embedded in his right eye, a perfect lens that blocks his peripheral vision and concentrates his entire perception. On the table rest tiny gold gears and industrial rubies cut with geometric precision. With steel tweezers in his steady hand, the watchmaker takes a microscopic wheel and places it on the axis. The watchmaker's entire world has collapsed into that circular mechanism. In the space under his lens, he is an absolute god. He dictates which piece fits with the other. As he assembles the watch, he is not struggling. He is sliding the gold atoms into their correct position through the application of a measured, serene pressure. When he places the last piece, and the flywheel begins to pulse with the perfect tick-tock, he has created order. You are that master watchmaker, and the mechanism of gold gears on the workbench is your own internal perception, your belief system, and the alignment of your emotional frequencies. The inertial slave is the man outside in the storm, rolling in the mud, trying to earn pennies while the sleet freezes his blood. The architect of the now has closed the heavy oak door. He has placed the optical loop over his own eye and decided that the only matter deserving the weight of his direct intervention is the gear of his own mind. When the solitary king assumes his position, the need to persuade or manipulate the world vanishes. You have cleared the cataracts of the ego. You have learned to dematerialize fear. You have forged the tension of quantum lead. Now, you sit at the workbench of your silence and assemble your reality. If you require an immense sum of capital to flow to your vaults, you do not run to the street to plead. You enter the workshop. You adjust the loop. You take the small gear of financial certainty and assemble it with the spring of structural gratitude. You sit in the silence of the room and force your biology to vibrate at the heavy frequency of one who already possesses the gold. You synchronize the internal mechanism until the tick-tock of your heart resonates with the precision of a Swiss watch tuned to the note of abundance. And then, the miracle of macroscopic refraction occurs. Since the outside universe is but the mirror of your inner workshop, the absolute order projects outward. The three-dimensional matrix cannot bear the dissonance between your internal state and your bank account. To maintain thermodynamic balance, the mirror is forced to reorganize external matter at lightning speed. Without you having to leave your throne, the supply lines activate. The phone rings. The signed contract arrives. The person who possessed the resources you needed, hundreds of miles away, feels a heavy, irrational impulse to find you, to deliver their capital, to ally with you. And you, from the center of your workshop, observe how gold enters under your door because you assembled the mechanism. This is the physics of gravitational attraction. Star systems are not held together by invisible threads, but by the dictatorship of mass. A red giant star at the center of a solar system does not move from its coordinate. It does not chase asteroids or plead with planets. The star is so immensely dense. Its core burns hydrogen with such thermodynamic ferocity that it literally bends the fabric of space-time around it. It creates a colossal gravitational funnel. Any piece of rock, ice, or gas that passes near that star falls inexorably into its net. It remains trapped in orbit, rotating around the king. When you settle into the observer's crown, you become that supermassive star. By ceasing to chase, you accumulate mass. By ceasing to fear, you retain all your heat. By keeping your optics clean and focused exclusively on your victory, your electromagnetic density becomes so crushing that you curve the matrix. The talents you need for your company, the mentors you seek, are all wandering planets that, upon entering the radius of your gravity, are drawn to orbit your empire. They do so gladly. Inertial matter desperately craves to be governed by a force of greater gravity. Scared people seek the anchor of a leader. When you radiate the concentrated light of an architect who does not react to fear, the entire market submits to you, not by coercion, but through a geological relief. They surrender to your weight because in your presence they finally feel safe. To inhabit this crown permanently, you must kill the fallacy of doing. Civilization indoctrinated you so that your identity depended on the amount of physical friction you generated. If you weren't sweating or stressed, you felt you weren't productive. The king at his center does not measure his value in agony. He measures it in results of asymmetric impact. He understands that 1 hour of perfect optical alignment, 1 hour of assembling gears in the workshop of silence, produces a 3D shockwave equivalent to 10 years of a slave's physical labor. This does not mean the architect does not act. He acts, builds systems, and forges the steel of his companies. But the quality of that action is diametrically different. The slave's action is hunting, driven by the fear of starving. The architect's action is harvesting. The architect knows the fruit has already been ripened by the sun of his internal perception. Walking to the tree is simply the last step. When action springs from this center of gravity, you do not experience imposter syndrome because the imposter is one trying to wear armor that is too big. The architect does not pretend to be a king. He has altered his atomic structure to become the biological embodiment of royalty. You observe world leaders with the tranquility of an old wolf recognizing his own pack. When you ask for a sum of money that would make a mortal tremble, you do not stutter. The figure leaves your mouth with the same bored normalcy as asking for water, because that figure is simply a mathematical measurement. The observer's crown is the total abandonment of resistance. It is the end of the war. This is where most aspiring titans break, because they are so addicted to the struggle, so drugged with the adrenaline of suffering, that when the prison door opens, they feel terror at the prospect of peace. They do not know how to live without the weight of the stone on their shoulders. You must dare to let go of the stone. You must dare to spare the lives of your former enemies, because from atop your gravitational throne, the insects biting your ankles are no longer visible to the naked eye. You must dare to accept that the universe wishes to please you with an ease that is almost humiliating to your old ego addicted to pain. Contemplate the work we have forged. We have torn away the illusion of solidity to reveal the atomic abyss. We have placed in your hand the chisel of the observer effect. We have rubbed your lens until the cataracts of your past disintegrated into smoke. We have taught you to transmute tragedy into jet fuel and to concentrate the light of your consciousness into a solar furnace. You have learned to block the world's noise and to anchor your will with quantum lead. And now, the final step belongs to you. The throne is empty, forged in black stone and bathed in the silence of the stars. The universe, that gigantic mirror of dust and light, is suspended in the void, waiting with geometric expectation for the occupant to take his place. All the chaos was but the right. Stop looking sideways for permission. Stop looking up for a savior, and stop looking down pitying the herd. Close your physical eyes. Deeply breathe, carrying oxygen to the base of your spine, and feel the monstrous, cold, and definitive weight of your own center of gravity. You are the lighthouse in the mist. You are the watchmaker in the storm. There is nothing out there that is not a reflection of what you allow to reside in here. Assume your position. Place the loop over your eye. Aim the beam of your attention toward the horizon you have decided to collapse. Do not move. Do not tremble. Hold the gaze with the majestic apathy of a god who is bored of his own omnipotence. And observe, with the coldness of 1,000 winters, how the mist of the universe bends and solidifies to deliver to your feet, without a single drop of blood, the absolute empire. Conclusion: the key to the universe. You have reached the end of the forge. Throughout your life, they convinced you that the universe was a fortress of black stone, a labyrinth of impregnable walls designed to keep you on your knees. They taught you to plead before the immense bronze gates of destiny, hoping that luck or the compassion of others would grant you freedom. Today, that lie has been incinerated in the solar furnace of physical truth. The walls were not made of stone. They were mist accelerated by your own terror. The fortress was not locked. You were simply pushing with desperation against a door that was always meant to open inward. The supreme revelation of quantum optics is terrifyingly simple. You have never been a victim of circumstances. The key to the universe is not a mystical artifact, nor a secret guarded by elites, nor an amount of gold buried in a distant vault. The key to the universe is, and always has been, the crystal of your own perception. The entire cosmos, with its burning suns, is a mute and passive canvas. It is an ocean of docile atoms begging on its knees for the command of a monarch who knows how to look at it. When you observe your life through the dirty lens of fear, The universe blindly obeys that projection and crushes you with its weight. But when you clear the cataracts of the ego, dense matter has no other mathematical choice. Matter must melt and reorganize to build the architecture of your empire. This crown, however, carries a colossal gravitational burden. By assuming the tyranny of the observer, you forever lose the right to the excuse. You can no longer blame the storm if your ship sinks, because now you know that you are the lighthouse that drew the gale. You can no longer lament the shadows projected in the cavern, because now you are the one holding the torch. You are the sole engineer of your physical reality. Everything you experience from this millisecond onward is your exclusive work, sculpted by the chisel of your attention. If the world seems hostile, your tuning fork is out of tune. Silence the acoustics of complaint. Raise the structural tension of your chest until you reach quantum lead. The time of useless hunting is over. The linear and exhausting effort of slaves is left behind. Lift your head. Clean your lens with the brutality of a diamond. Observe the abyss of possibilities and do not feel the slightest vertigo. Ignite the furnace of your will, drive your anchor into the bedrock of the now, and begin to forge with your eyes. The canvas is blank, the steel is molten, and all of matter holds its breath, awaiting your first command. The key is yours. Open the empire.